Welcome to Get Rich Education. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold, and I'm here to help beginning real estate investors today the biggest beginner mistakes to avoid. When you make an offer, can you lowball a turnkey provider and all those buyer steps like LLCs, mortgage pre-approval, inspection, appraisal, and closing today on Get Rich Education. Countless property investors get killed with maintenance costs, but that's far less likely when you buy brand new construction. Let me tell you about JWB Real Estate Capital in Jacksonville, Florida. They pioneered the build-to-rent model where you can invest in new construction turnkey rental properties. That's why JWB was featured on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. To learn more and see inventory, go to newconstructionturnkey.com. Finally, Total Control Financial gives you checkbook control of your 401k and IRA money to invest in real estate. It's time to get your retirement money into your own checking account, but you've got to avoid the little-known tax that you'll pay with any self-directed IRA. Instead, it's time for the QRP. Learn more and get your free copy of the QRP book by text messaging QRP in all capital letters to 72,000.
You're listening to the show that has created more financial freedom than nearly any show in the world. This is Get Rich Education.
Hey, welcome to GRE. This is Get Rich Education, episode 249, and this is your beginner's real estate investing audio guide. Hi, I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. We're talking about how to get into long-term buy and hold real estate investing, and that's because it's the most generationally proven way to build your wealth. First, let's talk about a couple of the biggest mistakes that real estate investors make. It's being invested in only one geographic market, and often that's the market that they just happen to live in. There is more risk with being in only one market than most people realize because now you're tied to the fortunes or misfortunes of just one area's economy. Another substantial, common real estate investor mistake is that they continue to hold on to one, I will call it special property in their portfolio that they usually need to get rid of, but they have either sentimental ties to it or they just hold on to it for convenience. And do you know what that property is? I'm actually talking about a specific property here. It's the home that you used to live in yourself. Well, now what's wrong with renting out the home that you used to live in yourself? You might still have the preferable owner-occupied financing locked in on that one. And after all, that's a better mortgage interest rate than you could have on a non-owner-occupied rental. The problem is that the property probably doesn't perform best as a rental. But you might be clearing, say, $500 a month by using your former primary residence as a rental today. But look, for you, it is often about the cash flow, yes, but there's something that's actually even more important than cash flow, and that's because nearly any property could cash flow if the loan were paid off. That's why it's really more specifically about the rent-to-value ratio of a property. If you are renting out the home that you used to live in, and it wasn't strategically bought as a rental from day one, if your rent-to-value ratio, or RV ratio, is 0.6%, meaning that for every $100K in value it has, you're only getting $600 of monthly rent income, well, then you're losing cash flow dollars every year and every month. Let's give a real-life example of the 0.6% RV ratio. Say that you can get $1,800 rent out of that $300,000 property that you used to live in. But instead, look, three $100,000 homes bought strategically as rentals can have a combined rent income of $3,000. Yes, you can still find that full 1% rent-to-value ratio. So it's either one $300,000 property at $1,800 of rent income, or it's three $100,000 properties at $3,000 of combined rent income. So you're losing, therefore, $1,200 of cash flow every month. You're only getting $1,800 rather than $3,000 by not buying and owning strategically in markets in the Midwest and South where the properties make sense as a rental on the day that you buy it. Your primary residence probably only made sense as a primary residence on the day that you bought it and while you lived there. Now, you can see that the only reason that you own it at this point is because you just kind of defaulted and you fell into it because you already had it. Well, you don't want to fall into things. You want to be intentional. You are a better investor when you're intentional rather than emotional. It gets even better for you now if you restructure things this way, because beyond your $1,200 of additional cash flow with this repositioning with 3 properties instead of 1, now you've also taken care of the first real estate investor mistake that I mentioned. With 3 rentals rather than 1, now you can be diversified across multiple markets. 2 birds are killed with 1 stone because with this repositioning, you've increased your cash flow by $1,200 and you're in multiple markets. Having just 1 property is not divisible. We're talking about real estate investing for beginners today. So let me clearly guide you through step by step on just how you go about buying your first property or even your next property. Writing an offer, inspection, vetting your property manager, and that process is known as due diligence, and appraisal, and on to closing, and then receiving cash flow from the tenant. The reason that you're doing all of this, because as you'll see, much of today's show pertains to any investment property at all, but we're talking mostly about how to buy single-family turnkey homes, especially homes outside of your home market, as most of the best deals are just not found where you live. Like they say, the best investors live where they want to live and invest where the numbers make sense. Get Rich Education is heard in 188 world nations, but today's content is primarily geared toward United States real estate investors, but those that live outside the United States will benefit here too. Here's a question that you might have. How do I go about setting up an LLC, a limited liability company, to hold my investment property in? I'll tell you what, I do not think how do I set up an LLC is the best question to ask. The best question to ask is instead, should I set up an LLC? The 3 main reasons people set up an LLC rather than holding the property in their personal name are either for anonymity, tax purposes, or asset protection. Now, if you know that you want to set up an LLC, well, I've done 3 episodes on that topic with Rich Dad Legal Advisor Garrett Sutton. You can go to GetRichEducation.com, type Garrett Sutton in the search bar, and those 3 episode numbers will appear so that you can listen. But the reason that the question is, should I even set up an LLC, is because setup of LLCs complicates your life. Maintaining a registered agent, articles of incorporation, having separate accounts, tracking expenses with separate credit cards, and paying annual fees for everything, depending on how many LLCs you have and how you structure your life, all that can wear you down. The second reason you should ask yourself, should I even set up an LLC, is because you might not have many assets for a litigant to go after. Retirement accounts have certain protections already. Equity in a property could be low-hanging fruit for a plaintiff attorney if someone gets a judgment against you, but since the return from equity is always 0, why would you have much equity in a property anyway? And then really the third reason you should ask yourself, why would I even set up an LLC, is that frivolous or slip and fall type of lawsuits, although possible, are rare. Not only have I never been a party to one, I've never even heard of any investor friend or associate having one, and I talk to a lot of people. You probably haven't heard of one either. Now, note that I'm not saying you can't get an LLC or even that you shouldn't get one. I'm saying prioritize those questions to yourself first. First, it's should I get one? And if that's a definitive yes, only then ask, how do I set one up? Why do you think you have to? Did some attorney use fear tactics to get you to think you need to set one up? If the result of the LLC's administrative overburden provides a greater reward in the form of either asset protection, anonymity, or tax benefit, which is typically a flow-through taxation type anyway, well, then you might get an LLC. So as a beginning real estate investor, understand that real estate is a credit-based asset, meaning that it's usually bought with a loan. So let's talk about getting your finances in order before you contact a lender or select an income property. Let's pull all the way back. This begins with you having enough cash liquidated for a 20% down payment on the property. Add in about 4% closing costs, depending on the state that you're buying property in. And on the lowest price property that's still in a decent area of a low-cost city, that might be a $60,000 property on the lowest end. So 24% of that then is about $14,000 that you'll need, and you should have some extra on top of that as reserves. Now, let's look at another part of your finances, your DTI, your debt to income ratio. It cannot exceed 43 to 45%, maybe up to 50% in some circumstances. So if your monthly minimum debt payments everywhere in your life, housing payment, minimum credit card payments, minimum automobile payment, if that sum is $5,000 and your gross monthly income is $10,000, that's a 50% DTI, and you cannot exceed that. Of course, before a bank is willing to loan you money, they want to have a reasonable assurance that you aren't weighed down with debt elsewhere, because then their fear factor goes up that they won't get paid back by you. Next, let's talk about your credit score. We dedicated an entire episode to this back in episode 54, if you can remember back that far. Philip Tyrone was here with us, and you learned more about credit scores than you probably ever thought you would. And he even went on to call the credit scoring system a total scam. He was quite opinionated. It was interesting and eye-opening, but just playing within the scam here as it might be, there are many different credit scoring models, but the FICO score, FICO, is a respected one that you're probably going to see your mortgage lender use. It stands for Fair Isaac Company. Their credit scoring range is 300, which is the worst possible score, up to 850. 850 is essentially a perfect score. Now, importantly, 740 is the highest score that helps you here in qualifying for a mortgage loan. So if you have a 782 or an 836, it doesn't help you qualify for the loan or get you a lower mortgage interest rate or anything else. 740 is where you're optimized. Now, just a quick overview of FICO credit scoring. There are 5 primary ingredients that make up your credit score. And in order of importance, they are your payment history, amounts owed, length of your credit history, new credit, and finally, credit mix. Maybe you're used to seeing that FICO pie chart. Well, the first one, payment history, is the most heavily weighted one. It's 35% of your FICO score. And as you might expect, the repayment of past debt is a major factor in the calculation of credit scores because it helps determine your future long-term payment behavior. Both revolving credit, which are things like credit cards, and installment loans, like mortgages, are included in payment history calculations. Installment loans, like mortgages, take a bit more precedence over revolving credit, like credit cards. This is why one of the best ways to improve or maintain a good score is to make consistent on-time payments, because that payment history is, again, 35% of your credit score. The next way is your amounts owed. That's 30% of your credit score. And this category is basically that credit utilization, or the percentage of available credit being used or borrowed against. See, credit score formulas see borrowers who constantly reach or exceed their credit limit as a potential risk. That is why it's a good idea to keep low credit card balances and not overextend your credit utilization ratio. So if you've got just a $1,000 balance on a credit card with a $10,000 credit limit, that's seen as a good ratio. You're staying well within your limits then. The third FICO credit score ingredient is the length of your credit history. That's 15% of your score, and this factor is based on the length of time all credit accounts have been open, and it also includes the time frame since an account's most recent transaction, newer credit users could have a tough time getting a high score versus those who have a long credit history. That's because if you have a long credit history, FICO just has more data on which to base their payment history. The fourth of 5 FICO ingredients is your credit mix. And now we're down to an ingredient only comprising 10% of your score. Credit mix, that just means that it helps your score if you have a combination of credit cards, retail accounts, installment loans, finance company accounts, and mortgage loans. And then finally, new credit makes up the last 10% of your FICO score. Don't open too many new credit accounts in a short period of time because that signifies a greater risk to lenders. And that's especially true for you if you're a borrower with a short credit history, and you sure don't want to open up any new lines of credit down the road when you're actually in the qualification process for buying a new property, unless you check with your mortgage loan officer first. So knowing what factors make up your FICO credit score can help you qualify for more loans and get better mortgage interest rates. That's really the bottom line. And see, this helps you get pre-qualified or pre-approved with your mortgage lender. To get pre-qualified, you just need to provide some financial information to your mortgage lender, such as your income and the amount of savings and investments that you have, and your lender will review that, and then they'll tell you how much they can lend you. After pre-qualification, you can seek the higher level status, and that is getting pre-approval for credit. Pre-approval is better than pre-qualification, and if you think about it, I guess it makes sense. Qualifying for anything in life is not as good as getting approved for something, I suppose. Pre-approval, that better one, that involves providing your more detailed financial documents like W-2 statements, paycheck stubs, bank account statements, and your previous 2 years' tax returns. This way, your lender can verify your financial status and credit. Now that you're pre-approved with a lender, you can focus on the market and property that you're interested in. This is the fun part. You can shop for property. Ridge Lending Group is the mortgage lender that we recommend most often because they specialize in income property loans and they don't have any seasoning requirements. Seasoning means that the person selling you the property needs to have held onto it for a certain length of time or the lender won't finance the property for you. While you're in the pre-approval process, you can be learning about a cash-flowing investment market and looking at some properties. You want to pick a geographic metro market that typically has low-cost properties and high rent incomes. In proportion to those low costs, that's how you get the good RV ratio. In fact, the market is more important than the property, and that is because your income comes from your tenant, and your tenant's income comes from a job. So you typically don't want to own property in a town with 12,000 people living in it that's an outlying area, not even part of a greater metro, where 1/3 of that town's employment is tied to one tungsten factory or even one semiconductor manufacturer, because now too much of your income stream's reliability is tied to just one industry. You want a bigger market. You also don't want to buy slummy property. Those tenants often don't pay the rent. You also don't want to buy the median priced home or higher because the numbers don't work out. You're going to be very challenged in getting cash flow. So you want that working class housing that's just below the median price point for that area. If you're not already confident about that and familiar with the right provider, we have information on the right market with the right provider with properties, and they're typically in the Midwest and South, and that is at greturnkey.com. So read a market report there. That is good, pointed information. Most investors are interested in a property for the production of cash flow. That's the margin by which your rent income exceeds all expenses. Rent income minus expenses should be a positive number. So that's your monthly rent income minus VIMTUM, VIMTUM, which stands for vacancy, insurance, maintenance, taxes, utilities, and management. They are your recurring expenses. And just like little easy ways to remember things, and VIMTUM is an easy way to remember that. So you're listening to the Beginner's Real Estate Investing audio guide here as a regular episode of Get Rich Education. If you're not a beginner and you're still listening, It's either a good review, and you might even be learning some new things along the way yourself, including should you ever lowball a turnkey provider when you're making an offer, and I have a negotiation approach for you on that in a few minutes. But first, one reasonable beginner question is, now why would someone want to sell me a cash flowing property in the first place? Why would someone sell me a good thing that paid them every month and then they could continue to hold on to it for cash flow themselves? Because if a property pays someone every month while they hold on to it, then why in the heck would they sell it to me? Okay, some seller out there has a golden goose that lays a golden egg every month. So why in the world would they give me an opportunity to buy the goose? Well, there are just so many reasons for selling cash flowing property. Yes, there actually are a ton of reasons, even for selling a young, healthy goose that lays golden eggs every month and is expected to do so for years. Well, a turnkey provider runs out of money too. They can't buy all the properties themselves. They would prefer a lump sum payout, which is what they get when they sell this property, because their business model is to go pay all cash for another distressed property that they can fix up. And if you think that they snatched up the good ones themselves a while ago, well, yeah, they probably did some of that. In fact, I want that provider to have snatched up some good properties from their own local market in the past, because it shows me that they believe in what they sell. Now, other good reasons that the, general public seller might want to sell you a property, not a turnkey provider, but just a general everyday seller. One reason is moving. Say that a family in City A owns a few mom and pop rental homes that they self-manage, and they're moving to City B in another state. Well, they will often sell their income properties. That's just because some people want to self-manage their property, often because they never explored their best and highest use, in my opinion. But anyway, if they have to move away to City B, they'll sell the property rather than trying to find a property manager in City A that they left behind. Another reason that people sell cash flowing property is that even if someone is not moving, that person might just be tired of this self-management hassle, but yet they don't try professional management because that person has the DIY mentality. That's so common to have the do-it-yourself mindset. Okay, so most people just don't take a strategic approach to real estate investing. Other reasons for selling cash flowing property are things like death, marriage, divorce, and all kinds of either joyous or tragic life milestones. If a husband and wife own rental properties, but running and managing them was kind of the husband's thing, and the husband dies, and then the wife is left not knowing how to run the properties, well, she'll likely sell rather than hire a property manager. People may sell their cash flowing property in case of all kinds of emergencies, medical and otherwise. Maybe they just need a quick lump sum of cash instead of the steady stream of cash flow over time that just won't work for them in their new situation, in their new emergency. So most of these situations involve some kind of external life change for property sellers, a lot of them tragic that I've just mentioned. But here's a personal one for you. A few years ago, I sold 2 cash flowing apartment buildings at the same time. Well, those sales actually closed on consecutive days, so nearly the same time. Both of those cash flowing apartment buildings that I owned, they were 100% occupied with tenants when I sold them. I had competent management in place already. There weren't any deferred maintenance issues with the buildings. You want to know my reason for selling 2 nice golden apartment gooses that were steadily laying some nice golden eggs? Can you guess why? All right, and fortunately, I didn't have any distress or emergency in my life. Oh, and I wanted to sell them fast, too. I could not let these 2 cash-flowing apartment buildings linger on the market for a while. I really wanted to get rid of them. I had no distress. Can you guess why I wanted to sell these long-producing golden gooses in a good job growth market that produced nice cash flow, nice golden eggs? I'll tell you why. That's because I knew that I could 1031 exchange those 2 gooses for 2 even larger gooses. Now, I won't get into the 1031 here on a beginner episode, but I replaced the 2 smaller apartment buildings with 2 larger apartment buildings that would produce even larger eggs if I pulled this off in a quick timeline. That way I could defer any tax on my profitable gain. So I found, 2 very fertile egg producers that were going to produce even more cash flow over time. So I think you get the message here. To the buyers of my smaller apartment buildings, I appeared as a very motivated seller of my cash flowing property, even though I had no external stress in my life. It was due to internal reasons that I wanted to sell, and it's the internal drive to expand my income. No shrinking thinking here at Get Rich Education. Now, when you found a cash flowing property that you want to buy, should you make a lowball offer to a turnkey provider? My definition of lowball here is a 10% discount. We'll say that a provider is offering a property for $120,000, then you'd make the offer for 10% less, which is $108,000. That's a lowball. My answer is no. That's not going to work. In almost every instance, that's too much of a discount, and it's going to eat their margin too much. Depending on how it's presented, a seller might even be less motivated to work with you if they get a lowball offer. This company has a business to run, and with a turnkey property that they're looking to sell, you're typically paying for the convenience because you leveraged their systems of them delivering this product to you that's already renovated, tenanted, and under management. That's the definition of a turnkey property. Now, can you knock off $1,000 or $2,000 and say, offer the seller then, in this case, $118K or $119K for the $120,000 property? Yeah, that might work. It sure wouldn't be deemed some unreasonable request, but it's good to at least provide a reason, some rationale in asking for the discount. Let me give you some perspective on negotiation too. For every $1,000 less in a mortgage loan that you take out, how much do you think that saves you in monthly payment? Did you ever figure out how much that saves you? Well, at a 5% interest rate on a 30-year loan, reducing your mortgage loan amount by $1,000 saves you $5. $5 in a reduced payment. For more perspective, keep in mind too that once the seller accepts your offer, it's really only the first part of the negotiation. Later, it's a negotiation with the inspection. We'll discuss how to navigate that inspection shortly. I'm Keith Weinhold. You're listening to Get Rich Education.
Would you like to know the easiest way to create wealth and passive income with real estate? This is Marco Santarelli with Norada Real Estate Investments. Now you can access the best deals without the stress or hassle of having to find, renovate, or manage those properties. We save you time by providing you with passive income investment properties in some of the best U.S. markets. Learn more by downloading your free copy of The Ultimate Guide to Passive Real Estate Investing. There's no obligation and nothing to buy. Simply visit passiverealestateguide.com and get your free copy today. That's passiverealestateguide.com.
For a real estate investor like you seeking an income property loan, go to Ridge Lending Group, NMLS 42056. Over the years, you've heard President Chaley Ridge generously devote her time to you here on the show as a guest. Ridge provides investment property loans in most U.S. states, and you're going to find out how they've helped more people realize their dreams of real estate financial freedom than any other mortgage lender in the entire nation when you get started at ridgelendinggroup.com.
This is author Kristen Tate. Listen to Get Rich Education with Keith Weinhold and don't quit your daydream.
Welcome back to Get Rich Education. This is your beginner's guide to real estate investing. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold, and we're talking about buying an income-producing property that may or may not be a turnkey property, which just means that it's already renovated, tenanted, and under management with a tenant in it on the day that you buy it. Now, once your offer is accepted by the seller, I want to give you really just a brief outline of what to expect next. And this is not intended to give you every step in exhaustive detail, but this is generally what comes next for United States real estate purchases, and custom varies somewhat from state to state. So with that in mind, once the turnkey provider or the seller accepts your purchase offer, you need to send in your earnest money. Earnest money is not the down payment. It's a smaller amount than that shows good faith that you're serious about your offer. It's often an amount of $5,000 or less, and it shows the seller that you're serious enough about buying the property that the seller now has the confidence to take their property off the market and not show it to anyone else. The seller should give you instructions on how to place your earnest money. Now remember, your earnest money deposit is not going directly to the seller. It is going to a third-party escrow account, and it is refundable to you in accordance with the terms of the contract that you signed. Your contract should have an estimated closing date in there. I want to emphasize that the key word there is estimated. While it is important that all parties work toward closing by this date, between you and me, let's just be realistic. The reality is that many transactions get delayed beyond the closing date in the contract for a variety of reasons. That might be on the seller side, sometimes having to do with construction or renovation delays. And if this happens, it's really nothing to be worried about. Just remain in touch with your seller, and you can simply sign a contract extension if it's needed when the time comes. As you are financing your property, be sure to keep getting your lender anything that they ask for so that they can keep processing your loan, because you don't want to hold up on your side. And as your closing gets near, they will probably ask you for some updated financial information and have some final stipulations from the underwriter. So as long as you're in touch with your lender, provide them with what they need as swiftly as you can. And during most of this time, while you're under contract and even before you're in contract with the seller to buy the property, most of your relationship with your lender and the seller, you're just sitting around waiting for the next stage. So once construction and renovation is completed on your property, I suggest that you order a professional home inspection before closing. As the buyer, this inspection fee is at your expense, but the home inspection is cheap insurance for you, and it's an important part of your due diligence. It might cost you about $300 for a single-family turnkey income property. A fourplex inspection might cost upward toward $800. When seeking an inspector, seek ASHI certification, ASHI, that is American Society of Home Inspectors. And you're looking for an inspector with a good reputation, someone that's licensed and bonded, and it's good to look for a level of experience as well. The choice really is yours as the buyer. Your inspector is going to tour the home and point out deficiencies, and what I'll break into a few categories. Number one is major concerns, and these are substantially defective safety issues that require immediate repair. Oftentimes, these are things that must be done in order for your lender to even finance the property for you. So the seller is going to do those things for you. That might be adding a railing to a porch. The second general category is recommended repairs. So the recommended but not required, that might be doing something like adding extra insulation in the attic. And then the third category is it's nice if it were done, like a kitchen cabinet door that's a little bit loose and doesn't close snugly. When you get your home inspection report back, because the inspector has compiled their findings, the key to remember is that the inspector will always, like always, return a list, usually a long list, of items that they recommend be corrected prior to you closing on and possessing the property. Now, this even happens in new construction where you have findings. And remember, you're not closing on the property in the condition it was inspected. Rather, the inspection is just part of the process on the path to getting that property to its final condition before you buy it. So you and the seller agree on what is going to be fixed, and the seller has to fix that at their expense, and you need to verify it to your satisfaction prior to closing. And the seller is anticipating that they will need to make some final repairs at their own expense after they get the inspection repair request from you. This is just all a normal part of the process. Of course, you can get in a car or hop on a plane and visit the turnkey property yourself and walk the property along with your inspector while they do the inspection, but I'd say fewer than 10% of buyers do this. But going to see the property in person is never a bad idea. Today, it's just easier than ever for an inspector or provider to email you a property video. The report that you get from your home inspector after he visited the home is going to have lots of photos and details in it anyway. Typically, your purchase offer is actually going to be contingent on a home inspection of the property to check for signs of structural damage or things that might need fixing. In this contingency, it protects you. It gives you a chance to renegotiate your offer or withdraw it without any penalty if the inspection reveals significant material damage to the property. Once the seller makes any of the needed repairs that the third-party inspector found and you ask them to fix, I suggest that you have a re-inspection done by that same inspector. This gives you the chance to confirm that any agreed-upon repairs have indeed been made, and you might spend another $100 on this re-inspection. Now, here's the thing. If the original inspection showed that a leaky faucet needed to be replaced, and the seller then said, okay, I'll do it, and then on the re-inspection later, it finds that that work wasn't actually done as promised, then any further re-inspection costs are often a cost borne by the seller, which seems pretty fair. They said they'd do the work, and the re-inspection that you paid for confirmed that the work had not been done in this case. So now back to the negotiation. If you asked for a reduced purchase price, that could begin to tilt away from you asking the seller to do too much stuff for you in the inspection. Now, how do I like to play this? Oftentimes, I make a full price offer on the property, and I might even let the seller know at that time that I'd like to give you your price, Mr. Seller, a full $120,000 in this case, and since you got your price, I would like my terms. My terms are that I am more bold in what I request the seller to do from the inspection findings. Maybe I will ask them to add that extra insulation in the attic as one of those recommended but not required for financing items, or replace a window pane that had condensation inside it because it looks nicer now. Then what's my justification for asking the seller for that? It's that I'm paying them their full price, and again, I don't really mind doing that. Financing an extra $1,000 only costs me $5 per month. Now, let's talk about the property appraisal. The appraisal is a tool that the bank uses to verify the quality of their collateral, because in your loan paperwork at closing, the bank will basically tell you that if you don't make your monthly payments, you'll be foreclosed upon and the bank will take back the property. That property is their collateral, so they want to make sure that the property seems to be worth as much or more than you're in contract for, that $120,000 in our example. Your lender is the one that orders the property appraisal, not you. In about 90% of U.S. states, you as the buyer pay for the appraisal, and it costs up to about $500. The appraiser is a member of a third-party company and is not directly associated with the lender, and it wasn't always that way. In fact, one factor that led to the housing downturn of 2007 in the Great Recession is that some lenders and appraisers were in cahoots together, and that can't happen anymore. By the way, the appraisal and some of these other steps are all part of your closing costs, all part of that about 4% of the property purchase price that I mentioned earlier. The appraisal is typically done by a certified appraiser physically visiting the home, going inside the home, and these people always seemingly have a tape measure with them. The appraiser checks out the premises, and their job is to use market comparables to make sure that the lender has adequate collateral in case you, the borrower, default. Okay, the bank doesn't want to lend out more than the property is worth, or else they could find themselves underwater if the borrower, you, default, and the appraisal helps protect against this. And don't confuse the appraisal with the assessment. An assessment is something that a county or municipality uses to measure the amount of property taxes that are paid. It's really unrelated to this appraisal. Now, before you select your property manager, I'd really like for you to talk with them on the phone or use a free video chat service like Zoom. It's zoom.us. It works a lot like Skype, but I think Zoom is easier to use. I mean, I really don't make many phone calls in my life anymore, just like a lot of people, but I want you to have a phone or video call with your property manager because I want you to have a good vibe, a good feeling about your property manager, and to vet that manager just like you would vet out a manager for a non-turnkey company. Hey, just because a property is branded turnkey by a company, that doesn't mean that you can dismiss doing your due diligence. Turnkey can be a great system, but there's nothing magical about that word alone. Don't overlook developing a good feeling about that property manager, because this is the one long-term relationship that you expect to have, because after the sale, the seller is no longer there. The inspector is no longer there. So I just can't emphasize that relationship with the property manager enough. They're really one of your key team members. They'll tell you the character of the current tenant that's currently in the home and find out how the manager is going to pay you as well. So feel them out and know what your communication flow is going to be like. And if they're part of the same company, a good manager should also connect you with whom renovated your turnkey property in case you have some questions for them. Now, notice, by the way, that I have not mentioned a real estate agent. Most turnkey providers work in a direct model so that you don't have to go through agents. You must sign a written management agreement with your property manager, and that agreement, that gives the manager written authority to manage your property for you. It will state their fees, and you'll have your contact information in that agreement. There are typically two fees, a leasing fee and a management fee. A leasing fee is where you'll spend 1/2 month's rent up to 1 month's rent amount when the manager screens and brings in a new tenant. So hopefully that only happens every 1 or 2 years, or even 5 years if you're lucky. Yes, you can typically approve or reject their selected prospective tenant. You are the owner of the property after all. A management fee is often 8 to 10% of 1 month's rent income, and that's what you pay monthly, ongoing. You can sign a management agreement with the property provider if they have management integrated in-house, and if not, you can lean on your provider for some recommendations for managers. But either way, there's one blank to fill in on your management agreement. It's a dollar amount up to which the manager can pay for expenses that come up against your account without having to contact you. For example, if the number $500 is written in there, that means if a maintenance or repair expense on your property meets or exceeds $500, that manager has to contact you to get your authorization before they incur that expense. You're the one that gets to choose that limit. As a beginning real estate investor, I would go with a lower figure, and then as you get comfortable and or you don't want to be bothered about the property as much, you can increase that dollar limit in which they need to contact you about approving maintenance or repairs before they do them. Basically, if there is anything that has to do with the property and you don't want to deal with it, then make sure it's written in your management agreement that the manager will perform it. Typically, it's going to say that the manager will collect rent, handle tenant relations, respond to repair requests, send you your rent money, keep your ledger of income and expenses on the property, post legal notices if a tenant is paying the rent late, and so many other associated duties that I personally don't want to deal with. I just want to live my life. Get that management agreement done, fully executed, signed by both you and the manager before you close on the property. And before you close, you can buy property insurance from any provider you choose. Your turnkey provider is often pretty happy to recommend some providers that their other clients have used in this market, or you can just Google and find your own. Be sure to let the insurance provider know that this is a rental property. It's not your primary residence where you live, and it's not a second home. Most turnkey buyers purchase both hazard and liability insurance as part of their policy. And like any other insurance policy, you're going to have choices about deductibles and monthly payments and coverage amounts. If you're financing your property, your lender will most likely be able to combine your property taxes and insurance into your monthly payment, so you just have one monthly payment for principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, much like you would on your primary residence. The financing process typically takes about 30 days from the time that you submit your earnest money. That's the approximate timeline here. But remember that you are a factor in how fast your property closes. If that lender needs another document, try to give it to them pretty promptly. So when you finalize this due diligence and verify that the seller has made all the agreed upon repairs from the home inspection report, you will be ready to close. You likely live in a different state than where the property resides, so you're going to close remotely, and the title company, or maybe it's a closing attorney in some states, they're going to prepare your closing documents, including all of your loan documents, and can arrange for a mobile notary to meet you with the documents wherever you choose. That can be in your home or your office or even your local coffee shop. So that way you can sign the documents in front of a notary who will then overnight the documents back to the title company, and that way your transaction can fund. Your lender will arrange for a title company to handle all of the paperwork and make sure that the seller is indeed the rightful owner of the house that you're buying. That's one of the roles of the title company. So it may seem like the closing process is a lot of work, but you really spend most of your time waiting. You're just kind of sitting on your hands, waiting for someone else involved in the transaction to come through. So find something enjoyable to occupy your time and distract you while you wait, and feel secure in the knowledge in knowing that you've done your research and you know how to make the closing process go smoothly. When you complete that closing with the mobile notary, and I've done these closings at my home's dining room table, I've done them in my employer's conference room back when I used to have a day job then, hey, you need to congratulate yourself on adding another income property to your portfolio. You know, the good news is that all of these stages we've discussed here, really the longest stage of them all, is your ownership of the property. You own it. You collect the cash flow. And hey, this isn't reason enough alone, but it's kind of cool that you own property in Tennessee and Florida and Indiana. You actually own part of each one of these states. And with each new turnkey property you buy, you might have just increased your mostly passive cash flow by $311 per month or $118 per month or whatever it is. If you can swing it, it can be more efficient time-wise for you to buy more than one property at a time. As you buy more income properties, it not only gets easier because you know the process, but you often will get quantity discounts. For example, a management company might charge you a 9% management fee on your first 3 properties, but then once you own 4 or more of them, they might charge you only 8% on all 4 rather than 9%. Insurance companies often have similar discounts for you, so you may very well get a little more profitable as you buy more rental property. And yes, a rent-to-value ratio of 1% is generally quite desirable, meaning 1 month's rent is 1% or more of the purchase price. For example, a $120,000 property and a rent income of $1,200. But that's getting harder to find. You know, just $1,000 of rent income on a $120,000 property would probably work fairly well too. You typically want to avoid properties with RV ratios of less than 0.7% or 0.75. Let's keep in mind that the RV ratio is only a rule of thumb. It doesn't account for a major recurring expense like property taxes. In high property tax jurisdictions like many Texas markets, you probably do want that RV ratio up higher. Now, as a beginning real estate investor, or even an advanced one, don't worry about knowing it all. No one is ever going to know it all with real estate. In fact, I've been actively investing in real estate since 2002, and just within the steps of acquiring a property, many of which I carefully discussed today, some incremental half step will come up in the process that I had not been thinking about previously sometimes, like signing a lead paint disclosure form. So you sure don't need to commit all this stuff to memory. Now, something that novice real estate investors say sometimes is something like, I would only buy an income property that I would live inside myself. Well, I contend that that is an awful criterion upon which to found strategic fundamentals on purchasing an income property, because once one filters property that way, now they have let emotions trump facts. If the fact that a clean, safe, affordable, and functional property has a good occupancy rate in a sound employment market, and it's in a decent enough neighborhood, and the numbers make sense, that's what's more important, okay? You aren't actually living there yourself, so it's really not a sound criterion. I mean, shoot, if I moved into any income property that I own, my lifestyle would take a substantial hit but yet I am not a slumlord. I do provide housing that's clean, safe, affordable, and functional, but they're not replete with fantastic amenities. It does not have Corinthian architecture with alabaster columns, okay? But I know there is a demographic for my rental property type that demands this responsible but no frills housing over the long term. It's about asking yourself a better question, really a great question for you to ask yourself is, will this property secure an income stream? That's how you want to be thinking. So would you rather have your property look cute as a button or secure an income stream? Okay, we are investors here. Now, some people think that in today's electronic age, you should just be able to complete a property purchase from the time you write an offer until you close on a property and do it all in the same day. That is definitely not true. As you just witnessed, physical things need to take place, and that is because you are buying a real physical asset. We've been talking today about how you buy an income property, just simply that, especially as it pertains to buying an out-of-state income property from the time you get a property under contract and submit the earnest money to escrow all the way into closing, because that's how to generate passive income, which in turn creates a rich life for you. Again, this is not an all-encompassing guide today with every little detail, but we've really hit the major milestones in the process and more. You've got a good general guide now on the income property buying structure. You might have learned something about prioritization as well. Perhaps LLCs matter less to you and a communicated property manager matters more than you thought. Today's show has the type of content that will be about as relevant 5 years from now as it does today. Now, today is also evidence that real estate does not have the liquidity that some other investments do. It takes longer to get in and get out. However, that low liquidity actually contributes to relative price stability in real estate. Okay, there's no panic selling in real estate. Maybe the most important thing for you to keep in mind is that you cannot make any money from the property that you don't own, and your future depends on what you do today. For you to know something and not do something is really to not know something. The most important thing you can do is act, since you can't make any money from the property that you don't own. So again, a recommended specific income property lender is Ridge Lending Group. Our network of income property providers is at greturnkey.com. And one particular property provider to highlight over there is Memphis, Tennessee's Mid-South Homebuyers. Not only are they great with beginners, but they have profitable properties at lower price points, and that's what some beginners would rather start with. Mid-South Homebuyers has been rather popular for all those reasons, and that's created a longer wait list for their properties. Well, the good news is that Mid-South Homebuyers has just expanded into another great investment market. That's Little Rock, Arkansas, so that should help shorten their wait list. If you can't remember those three resources, Ridge Lending Group for the loan, GRE Turnkey, and Mid-South Homebuyers for the properties, no worries. I'll be sure that they are the first three links in the resources mentioned part of the show notes that accompany the episode here. There would be nothing worse than for me to share today's knowledge with you and then not let you know where to go to act upon that knowledge. It has been my pleasure for me to bring you your beginner's real estate investing audio guide today. If you got value from today's show, I'd be grateful if you took a screenshot of the podcast player image here on your podcatcher and posted it to your social media account, your Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn, and let your social friends know that if they're ever interested in real estate investing, this episode is a great place to start for beginners. Next week, I'll talk about how you retain your tenants at the same time you raise the rent. I'm your host, Keith Weinhold. Don't quit your daydream.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Get Rich Education, LLC exclusively.
The preceding program was brought to you by your home for wealth building, GetRichEducation.com.